He said he would marry me as long as I took the blame for his sweetheart. Despite spending 5 years in prison, he never came to visit me once. When we met again, he was still the proud and aloof Mike. I had become a mute who couldn't even lift my head. The prison door clanged open, but there was no one outside, and maybe Mike had long forgotten about me in this world. Years of habit made me stand up straight instantly and lower my head nervously as soon as the police spoke. In those 5 years in prison, I was beginning to forget my own name. The police sighed, reminding me to behave well once I got out. I thanked them and turned away with a self-deprecating smile, having learned how to survive among all the different prisoners inside those walls. Walking on the deserted street, big snowflakes were falling all around, but I could only wear the torn clothes from 5 years ago, feeling the pain of my still unhealed wounds being prickled by the cold wind. Looking around, I still didn't see Mike anywhere. He really didn't come to pick me up. After a while, I finally arrived at Mike's doorstep, but I couldn't bring myself to knock. Would he keep his promise? Mike never really liked me from the start, and now he definitely wouldn't want to marry me. Who would like a mute like me? Dragging my almost frozen legs heavily, I left Mike's place. When I reached the corner, a black car stopped in front of me, and as the window was lowered, Mike's stern face appeared. "Are you Tiffany?" As my hollow eyes met Mike's, I hesitated for a moment, feeling a surge of joy in my heart. He still remembered me. Mike didn't forget about me. I was about to wave and greet him, but I noticed Mike was frowning, looking me up and down with disbelief. There was distance, coldness, surprise, but no sense of joy in his eyes. Just like 5 years ago, Mike's features were strikingly handsome. While I had been treated like a fish on the chopping board, letting those people carve me into what they wanted, I was no longer the bright and sunny Tiffany. Quickly lowering my head, I gripped the hole in my clothes at the hem. "Tiffany?" Mike called again. I stammered with my lips trying to say his name, but not a word could come out. I was still a mute. What was I thinking? At that moment, another cold voice came, "Mike, let's go." I raised my head slightly and saw Mike's uncle, Andy, in the back seat through the car window, looking at me with furrowed brows and no warmth in his eyes, a terrifying presence. I felt like he was targeting me, and the painful memories of being humiliated and bullied in prison for 5 years made me immediately start bowing and apologizing incessantly. I was afraid this person who seemed to have a bad temper would treat me like the others, hitting me, insulting me freely, tearing my clothes. I bent more and more, stepping back and falling on the roadside. The still healing wounds on my arms were scraped again, staining my thin clothes with fresh blood, causing a sharp pain. But my throat could only produce a harsh cry of pain. Mike got out of the car and approached me. Once again, a little hope rose in my heart. He wouldn't despise me, would he? That's why he got out of the car to help me. He hadn't visited me in 5 years, so he must have forgotten about me already. I had taken the blame for his sweetheart, so Mike should at least be grateful to me, right? Yet, Mike stopped a meter away from me. A sigh escaped him, and as I looked up at him, I saw that fleeting annoyance in his eyes. The last spark of hope in my eyes disappeared completely. I clenched my fists, tried to stand up, but my swollen ankle sent a sharp pain through me, and I fell back down. Softly asking him for help in my heart, I was met with his impatience. "Go home first, I'll find you in a couple of days." Leaving me with these words, he turned and walked away quickly, as if something disgusting was chasing him from behind home. Where did I have a home to return to? Before I met Mike, I was an orphan. And after I met Mike, he had driven all night to accompany me on a business trip in another city when I was scared. When I was crying because things weren't going well at work, he held me in his arms and comforted me softly. I once mentioned wanting to eat cake, and despite never cooking before, he got up in the middle of the night to cook for me. He got cut by the knives and burned himself. But he blamed himself. Just because the cake got burnt and he couldn't feed me. At that time, I thought, this must be what love is, right? However, just when I thought I was finally going to have a home, his sweetheart, Tina, came back from abroad. It was then that I realized Mike's affection and spoiling weren't for me, but a way to reminisce about another person through my face. I wanted to ask Mike, on that night when he drove all night to find me, Was he worried that Tina might also be scared in a foreign country? When he comforted me in his arms, were those comforting words actually meant for Tina? When he was making me a cake, was he thinking of calling Tina to ask if she had eaten properly? In the end, I was still so weak, I couldn't ask him these questions. In that moment, I hated my face immensely. Why did it have to look like Tina's? For a long time, I lived in the torment of self-denial, and I had already decided to leave him. But before that, Tina got into a conflict with someone and accidentally caused their death. I was there. Mike told me that as long as I admitted to the authorities that I did it, he would marry me. How absurd and ridiculous. While others got married for love, I had to take the fall for his sweetheart, in exchange for a marriage devoid of any love, but I agreed. At that time, I naively believed that if I truly touched him with my sincerity, Mike would eventually fall in love with me. For the sake of Mike, I'm willing to give up everything, to be so humble, just afraid he doesn't love me. However, after enduring 5 years of imprisonment, he still doesn't love me. The snow is getting heavier, tears blurred my eyes, and Mike's figure is long gone. I struggled to stand up, fighting the pain in my ankle, almost stumbling, when a strong arm caught me by the waist. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice Andy coming back after leaving. Looking into his cold eyes, I reflexively shrank my shoulders and trembled in struggle. Don't hit me, I'll never bother Mike or his family again. Am I a devil? Andy said sternly, letting me go. Retreating with my lame leg, head bowed, wishing I could bury myself in the snow, I caught a glimpse of Andy raising his arm, thinking he was going to hit me, and I knelt on the ground, begging for mercy with sobs. Get up. Andy pulled me up. You are Mike's fiance, no one can bully his family. He took off his down jacket and wrapped it around me, covering me tightly from head to toe, shielding me from the biting cold winds and snow. Timidly, I glanced at him and saw no disgust in his eyes, which slightly relieved me. Did anyone still remember Mike's promise, remembering that I am Mike's fiance? Andy escorted me back to Mike's house. When Mike saw me upon his return, his brow furrowed even more. What are you doing here? My heart sank again at his words. The servants looked at me with disdain. Even though the new clothes on me were sleek, they felt prickly, and the bright colors only accentuated my pale face. Perhaps to them, a clown would always be a clown no matter what new clothes they wore. Mike not only forgot about me, but he probably detested me as well. During the 2 weeks I stayed at Mike's house, I only saw him on the first day, and he never returned home afterward. The servants' eyes became even more mocking, openly discussing how thick-skinned I am to stay in Mike's house despite his clear disapproval. What hope was I still holding on to for him? Looking at my gaunt reflection in the mirror, sunken eyes, I questioned myself. Tiffany, can't you have a little self-awareness? I took off the new clothes provided by Mike's family, changed into the only thin, worn-out outfit that belonged to me, preparing to leave. But at the doorstep, I met Mike's driver, who said Mike wanted him to take me out for dinner. I shook my head at him, thinking it was impossible for Mike to want to have dinner with me. The driver insisted, not letting me leave and coaxing me to get into the car. His persistence almost stirred a glimmer of hope in me. Maybe my sudden appearance made Mike unable to accept it, so he now wanted to talk things over with me. As I hesitated, the driver half pushed me into the car. The car stopped at a club, where the lavish decor and fashionable guests made me feel out of place, especially in my old, tattered clothes. Unsure of what was happening, I was led by the driver to a private room where someone opened the door for me. As the door opened, my heart leaped to my throat when the person warmly pulled me inside, where various people were seated. In the middle sat Tina, untouched by time, even more radiant. Compared to her, I felt like nothing more than a clown, fallen into darkness and weakness since the day I went to prison. Mike was absent, and the only person here who knew me was Tina. She had deceived me into coming. But I couldn't even muster the ability to question her. I didn't want to play second fiddle before her. I turned to leave, but her friends stopped me, with exaggerated smiles inviting me to sit down. They blocked the doorway, so I had no way out and was pulled back by them. Someone quipped, after all these years, who would have thought Mike is still so fond of Tina? Tina asked him to bring his fiancée to show everyone, and he actually did it just to amuse her. All eyes turned to me, some watching like a show, some mocking, some openly disdainful. My heart ached. The habits from prison made me endure, head bowed, teeth clenched. Tina sat, I stood. Tina carried herself confidently and elegantly, while I felt tense and timid. Before her, I seemed like a heinous criminal. However, she was the one at fault, impulsive and the cause of my imprisonment, while I was supposed to be Mike's chosen fiance. While Mike promised to marry me, he deceived me into coming to be ridiculed by Tina and her friends. Tina appraised me as if a superior of the old society assessing a lowly servant, saying lightly, "Tiffany, long time no see, sorry. I was just joking with Mike, didn't expect he really called you here." But I felt no remorse in her gaze or tone, rather a sense of triumph. Someone whispered to Tina, "Don't make a scene, as long as Mike isn't blind, he must love you." Even if he were blind, he still only truly loves Tina. The others roared with laughter. They shamelessly screamed in my ear, "He said his grandmother forces him to marry you? Are you deaf now, too, after becoming mute?" Tina stood up and walked over to me, pulling the woman who was yelling in my ear away. She had a smug look on her red lips and said, "All right, she's at least Mike's fiancée, don't bully the disabled." Seemingly protecting me, she actually stomped on my last ounce of dignity. Her attitude was so arrogant, with a gaze full of pity towards me, and determination towards Mike. I helped her take the blame, but Tina didn't even show a hint of gratitude. It was just expected of her. Why? Why should she pity me? I was the one insulted in prison, beaten and kicked on the ground, and even had my head pushed into cold water in the dead of winter. These were supposed to be Tina's experiences, but I endured them for her, just to gain Mike's tiny bit of affection. But Tina just stood there quietly, while Mike offered his true heart to her, even willing to humiliate me to amuse her. Why? The extreme anger made me unable to bear it anymore. Summoning all my courage, I slapped Tina. Tina looked at me incredulously, and everyone else was shocked by my sudden move, all frozen in place. After a moment, Tina raised her hand without any hesitation, and others also gathered around, memories of the scenes in prison flooding my mind. The painful experiences made me shudder. Just when I thought Tina's slap was about to land on me, Mike's voice came. "Tiffany, how dare you?" It turned out that from the moment Mike appeared at the door, Tina was already in tears covering her cheeks. She was even shaking more violently than I was. Then I felt a kick to my chest, and fell heavily to the ground. Mike stared at me angrily and said, "Tiffany, I will do what I promised you. Why do you still want to cause trouble for Tina?" I shook my head desperately. "No, I didn't. She tricked me into coming here." Mike looked disgusted, putting on that pitiful act for who? "Speak up. Speak up." But I'm mute. The others started snickering. Mike continued, "If you still want to marry me, stop thinking you can compete with Tina, know your place." At that moment, another voice spoke up, "What place? She is the future Mrs. Mike." It was Andy. Just like last time, he pulled me up from the ground. Andy looked at Mike, "Getting into a fight with your own people for irrelevant reasons, Mike, you're really something." Mike was still defending Tina righteously, arguing how innocent she was. While I was being unreasonable, it turned out that when Mike loved someone, he would unconditionally stand on their side, without distinguishing right from wrong, being heartless. And no matter how much effort I put in, I could never be Mike's choice. From now on, I will never have such ridiculous dreams again. I turned around and left. This time no one stopped me. I only had $2,000 on me from before I was in prison, and after buying a down jacket, I had even less. I couldn't find a suitable place to rent in the short term. And since I didn't communicate with people for a long time, I always shrank back during conversations, still being mute, and almost no one wanted to talk to me. And no one was willing to hire me. The restaurant owner pushed me away disgustingly. "A mute person wants a job? Get out of here, don't bring bad luck to me." I stumbled back and was about to fall, but someone caught my shoulder. I turned and saw it was Andy again. He looked fierce, his eyes cold, and every time I was too afraid to look into his eyes, I instinctively wanted to avoid him. Andy tightened his grip on my shoulder. You don't hide from those who bully you, but you avoid me. Who's trying to help you? I shook my head, hurriedly gesturing with my hands. This was the first time I used sign language since being released from prison. Andy didn't show any disgust or disdain, which relieved me. Andy asked, "What's the meaning?" He held out his hand, palm up, for me to write on. Staring at his large hand, I hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, I wrote just 2 words. Andy chuckled, "Thank you? You gestured a lot just now, and then only wrote 2 words?" When he smiled, it was even scarier than when he didn't. I bowed 90 degrees to him, then quickly turned and left while he was still in a daze. I couldn't tell him the truth. He didn't seem like a nice person to me. Andy caught up with me. "Aren't you looking for a job?" He said, "I have a house for you to clean every day." I knew Andy said this on purpose, wanting to help me, and I was grateful to him. During the time I showed the house to Andy, Mike hadn't tried to contact me even once, and I didn't reach out to him or follow his news. I figure without me as thorn in his side, Mike must be happy. I can't accept being deceived by Mike, humiliated by Tina, and defeated. The cowardice and inferiority that have been ingrained in me for 5 years make me clueless about how to deal with it. I hate that I always just run away. I started working hard to make money. Since I couldn't find a job in real life, I had to take drawing orders online. I draw in the morning, go out in the afternoon to interact with the outside world, and exercise my almost disappearing ability to communicate with people. Andy occasionally comes to check on my work. Even though I know he means no harm, I still instinctively shrink back when I see his stern face. Andy can't stand my weakness. "Look at you, no wonder you're bullied by Mike and that other woman." Everyone says I ruined Mike and Tina's relationship, but when Mike and I were together, he had already broken up with Tina, and it was Mike who actively pursued a relationship with me. Because they think Mike and Tina's relationship was true love, so, in their eyes, I became the villain. Andy was the first one to stand on my side, acknowledging that Tina was the other woman. But his tone was harsh, merciless, stabbing right at my heart. All the grievances from the past 5 years surged up because of his words, and tears couldn't help but flow. Andy, staring at my red eyes, seemed a bit at a loss for a moment. "Okay, my bad, I shouldn't have said that." After that day, Andy came over more often, perhaps because he really couldn't stand my weak appearance. Every time, he would take me to crowded places or important events to build up my courage. When someone dared to mock me as a mute who only knows sign language, one look from Andy would scare them into apologizing or running away. Gradually, the number of people ridiculing me decreased, and under Andy's influence, I slowly started to care less about the strange looks from others. At first, I had empty, lifeless eyes, but as I saw Andy sternly scaring off those who bullied me, a smile inadvertently crept onto my face, radiating light. However, Andy insisted that I go to the hospital for treatment. I knew I couldn't speak, not because of damaged vocal cords or other physical reasons, but due to psychological trauma. Overcoming psychological barriers meant inevitably touching on the pain that I never wanted to recall from the 5 years in prison. I didn't want to face it. I argued with Andy, and he didn't come over for several days. I also stubbornly refused to talk to him, even when I had a fever and a splitting headache in the middle of the night. I held back from seeking his help. The next day, Andy found me lying in bed with a burning forehead and carried me to the hospital. Through gritted teeth, he said, "You sure have backbone when it comes to me, but are you not planning to tell me if your brain is fried? Why don't I see you being this tough with Mike?" I opened my eyes groggily to see him. In the past, when I was sick, no one had ever shown such concern and worry for me. My head nestled in his shoulder, I felt like crying. Andy, resignedly, said, "Every time I mention Mike, you cry. You better not still be holding on to him." In the hospital room, Andy said this more than once, with an expression that was both angry and restrained, as if he had suffered a great deal. The old man responsible for treating me complained to Andy, "She's married to you, which means she cares about you. Don't always dwell on your wife's ex." I pointed at Andy, then at myself, waving my hands vigorously to indicate that my relationship with Andy was not like that. The old man obviously didn't understand what I meant and said with a smile, "You feel annoyed that he keeps bringing this up, and you don't want to be with him anymore, right? It's inevitable for couples to have obstacles. He annoys you, just educate him. Andy glanced at my blushing cheeks, twitched his lips slightly, and pushed the doctor out without explaining anything. I covered my head, embarrassed to look at him. With a hint of a smile in his voice, Andy said from above me, "I have to handle some things, I'll be back in a while. Come out and get some fresh air, don't suffocate yourself." I only breathed a sigh of relief when I heard the door close. After a moment's pause, I lifted the blanket a bit, and just as I was about to uncover myself further, I heard movement at the door. Thinking it was Andy coming back, I quickly covered myself up again. But the next second, Mike's voice echoed, "Tiffany, I promised to marry you. Why won't you give me a chance? Are you so shameless that you have to cling to Andy?" I sat up abruptly and saw Mike standing not far away with an expression of disgust and anger, Tina beside him. Tina always smiled so gently in front of Mike. "Mike, Tiffany has become mute, it's understandable that she's eager to marry into your family." Mike's face turned even uglier. "What chance? It's just using any means necessary." "Mute? What do you mean?" He looked surprised. "Tiffany, you?" Looking at me, Mike seemed to remember that I hadn't said a word since the day I went to him after getting out of prison, and his expression became complex. This was the man I risked everything to love. For so long, almost everyone knew I had become mute, yet Mike could completely ignore everything about me. Tina spoke softly. "I heard Tiffany's vocal cords are intact, and she's physically healthy, but she just can't speak. It should be true that she's mute, definitely not pretending. Mike, just don't dwell on this." A hint of guilt briefly flashed in Mike's eyes, then disappeared completely. "Tiffany, are you deliberately pretending to be mute just to get my sympathy and marry me? You promised to marry me. I didn't force anyone. I traded my own future and prospects for it." Even without love, how could Mike say such words? I picked up the cup on the table and smashed it in their feet, shattering into pieces. Tina screamed. Mike hugged her, glaring at me angrily. "Tina hit the nail on the head. Are you getting angry out of embarrassment? If you still want to marry me, put away these tricks." I pointed at the door, silently saying one word, "Get out." The two left, and a few minutes later Tina turned back. With an unabashed smile, she triumphantly said, "Mike trusts me unconditionally. Truth be told, it was me who convinced him to persuade you to take the blame for me. I told him I have anxiety disorder and would die if I went to jail, and he believed it. In fact, when you admitted to accidentally injuring someone, all my anxiety disappeared. Mike bought me a house abroad, supported me to attend a top university to finish my studies, introduced me to outstanding people, traveled the world with me, did everything I liked. These 5 years have been the happiest time of my life. And you?" Her smile felt like the sharpest knife plunging into my heart, leaving me speechless. "Was someone bullying you in prison?" The dark and hopeless past replayed in my mind, trembling, tears streaming down. In the depths of my anguish, longing for death, every minute I waited for Mike to look at me, to help me. Instead, he was on sweet dates with Tina, making her happy. How could they trample on my sincerity, trample on my dignity? I grabbed everything within reach and threw it at Tina. "Get out." The boiling anger stirred me to speak. "You will never marry Mike in this lifetime. You will never be able to marry Mike." Tina rushed to hit me but was kicked out by Andy, who entered. Andy coldly eyed her. "I've recorded everything you said. If the 5 years experience makes you so proud, let everyone know." Tina's face changed drastically, wanting to say something but was dragged out by Andy's assistant, who came in. I couldn't stop my tears, repeating one sentence. "I must make Mike and Tina pay. They must pay." Andy comforted me, distracting me with jokes. "The first time I heard your voice, unexpectedly, I heard Mike's name. Andy was so intriguing, huh?" It was then that I realized I could speak, eyes filled with pleasant surprise. I opened my mouth, wanting to call Andy's name, but found myself still in his arms. My ears immediately turned red, pursing my lips, cautiously pulling away from his embrace. Andy let go, smiling wryly. "You never plan on calling my name in this lifetime? Am I that frightening?" I hung my head, Andy's gaze fixed on me. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, I gathered the courage to look him in the eye. My mind went blank for a moment, then I asked him, Andy, do you like me? Regret flooded me as soon as the words left my mouth, wishing I could disappear. Andy remained calm and countered, don't you like me? Andy originally planned to take the recording straight to the police, but I intercepted it and gave it to Mike. I wanted to see how Mike, after learning the truth, would handle the situation. I waited for days without news. Perhaps Mike hadn't asked Tina because she had come to Andy and me several times, pleading not to release the recording. Obviously, she didn't know the evidence was in Mike's hands. I reminded Tina, Mike is the one you should be pleading with. I sent him the recording, all backups on my end have been deleted. Tina asked, What? What do you mean? I smiled and said, it means that currently, only Mike can send you to jail. It all depends on his choice. I didn't know how Tina spoke to him, but there was still no news of Mike making the recording public or handing it over to the authorities. Mike's grandmother, who was also Andy's mother, returned from treatment in another city and called Andy and me to discuss marriage and set the wedding date. On the night the engagement was announced, Mike came to me looking defeated, his eyes bloodshot, reeking of alcohol. He stood in front of me for a long time without speaking, as if holding something back. Impatiently, I said, you can cover up a crime for Tina, without me as a stumbling block, shouldn't you and she live happily ever after? Why are you here? Mike hurriedly said, I never wanted to cover up for her, I just don't know how to explain. I don't know how I feel about you. I didn't want to hear his flowery words of regret, you have never had an ounce of feeling for me. I was just a tool for you to love Tina. Sacrificing my own marriage just so your lover can live carefree. Many people have been moved by the love between you two. Mike came closer, grabbing my shoulders, it's not like that, Tiffany. I just didn't realize I've been in love with you all along. Maybe I've liked you for a long time. When I saw you sad, hurt, I didn't feel nothing. I felt restless, uneasy. I thought it was because I was compromising in my marriage. I hated being forced into marriage, so I felt uneasy. I pushed him away, feeling like I had just heard the biggest joke, you say you love me? I was humiliated, my arm broken, my head submerged in cold water in winter, feeling suffocated and frozen. I wished so many times that you could come see me. And you? You lived in luxury, afraid of her anxiety disorder, buying her a house, sending her to school, introducing her to excellent people, making her happy, sweetly dating her, a bright future for Tiffany. While I've become a mess. The one really traumatized and left with psychological scars is me. Do you know how it felt when I realized I couldn't speak? How ridiculous, I questioned if I was even worthy of you, would you marry me? With each sentence I spoke, Mike smacked himself hard, leaving traces of blood in his mouth, a sorrowful expression, looking like a shell of his former self, mechanically hitting himself. After hearing my question on marriage, he immediately said, yes. It's not that you're not good enough for me, it's I who's not good enough for you. I want to marry you, I just want to marry you. I squinted disgustingly, continued speaking, you love me, but when you saw me standing in the snow wearing tattered clothes and shivering, your first reaction was to frown? Blaming me for dirtying your eyes, and ruining your relationship with Tina? You love me, yet you allowed Tina to deceive me and humiliate me. Everyone surrounded me mocking me for being dumb. You came in and saw Tina crying her eyes out, didn't even bother to ask, just assumed I bullied her? Mike stopped explaining, kept apologizing, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'm sorry, can you give me another chance? Tiffany, I'm sorry. The once proud and arrogant Mike was now kneeling on the ground, because of a word, a facial expression, seeking my forgiveness in a pitiful manner. I calmly said, sorry is useful, why call the police? A tear seemed to slide from the corner of Mike's eye, then, a glimmer of light flickered in his empty eyes. Tiffany, I understand, I will do as you say. The next day, Tina was arrested by the police. Tina had gone abroad to study before. Mike paid a large sum of money for her acceptance, and now got in touch with the school to revoke her academic credentials. He gave back to her the house, car, and cash he had gifted. Due to harboring and shielding, Mike was also sentenced to 2 years in prison. he was expelled from the board of directors. 1 month before the wedding, Andy accompanied me to see him one last time. When Mike saw me, he joyfully stood up, rushed to the window, calling my name. "Tiffany, I knew you would come to see me." Andy caught up to me, firmly wrapped his arms around me, as we watched Mike, separated by the glass, calling my name gleefully. In that instant, Mike's eyes lost the last glimmer, his face gray, as if lifeless. After a while, he muttered, "I drove all night to find you, all I thought about was that you might be scared when you were sad. I comforted you, at that moment, I worried only about you. When I was baking a cake, I always remembered that you liked it sweet, added several more spoonfuls of sugar. But even then, I never had time to think about others." But Mike couldn't hold back his tears. "Why didn't I cherish you? Why did we miss each other?" The question that I couldn't ask 5 years ago finally has an answer. I turned around, with a calm gaze. Maybe it was wrong from the beginning. Mike shouldn't have agreed to date me just because I resembled Tina. I shouldn't have sacrificed my marriage to help Tina escape responsibility. I shouldn't have been tempted by so-called love, agreed to such absurd demands, and shouldn't have believed that Mike would eventually fall in love with me. Seeing me silent, Andy hugged me tighter. "Don't tell me, you're still thinking about that jerk?" I wrapped my arms around his waist, cheek against his chest. "Andy, I really like you." Not hearing a response, his heartbeats were saying it all. I smiled, looked up at him, and pointed to the location of his heart. "Andy, your heart is beating so fast." The next moment, Andy's kiss fell suddenly. I tiptoed to respond. This time I will strive to hold on to the happiness that truly belongs to me. Andy kissed for a long time. I was almost out of breath, and he wouldn't let go. Passers-by looked at us with curiosity, my ears and cheeks turning red with embarrassment. I tapped his chest, trying to push him away, but Andy hugged me tighter around the waist. However, the kiss finally ended. But then, he grabbed the hand I had just tapped him with, pressed it against his chest, lips close to my ear, his voice husky. "Did it feel good when you slapped me earlier? Did he think I was deliberately taking advantage of him? Andy, let's get married. And then you can touch however you want." I slightly squeezed his hand and felt his chest, couldn't help but gulp. I blurted out, "Okay, okay." Before I knew it, my feet were lifted off the ground, and he picked me up and ran towards the car parked nearby. The car drove straight to the place to register our marriage. I was still dazed after the registration. Andy, we got married?" We got married." Andy held my hand again, brought it to his chest. "What do you want to do?" I don't want to." I avoided eye contact, trying to pull my hand back. Andy laughed. "Don't want to do what?" He still pressed my hand against his heart. "I just want you to feel my heartbeat, to know how happy I am at this moment." Andy's gaze was intense. I couldn't resist, and lowered my head even though I tightly pursed my lips. I couldn't hide the smile creeping on my face's corners. "I really am so happy."